Really wanted to tell a faithful retelling of Much Ado so that it could be used in schools, so that people could use this book if they wanted to teach Much Ado About Nothing in a high school. They could use it. So I wanted it to be faithful enough that it would be useful for a teacher. And so that really put a lot of constraints on, like, okay, well, I can't rewrite the plot so one person can tell it, right? Because the original play, you get the point of view from, like, I don't know, all these different people. So yeah, there are people in scenes in this scene that don't, all the miscommunication relies on them not being in the same scenes together.
We've also had Molly here before as an author. Her debut novel, Saving Hamlet, is the tale of a girl who just wants to stage manage good plays that don't go horribly wrong. And she is all that stands in the way of destruction for 2 productions of Hamlet, both her school play and the very first Shakespearean production, which honestly needs a lot more work than the high school one. In Nothing Happened, nothing happens.
Oh, actually, something does happen.
Okay, fine. Fine. Nothing Happened is the modern-day summer camp retelling of Much Ado About Nothing, a good play, complete with teen parties, capture the flag, and struggling love. It is a delight. And now, with great delight, please join me in welcoming Molly Booth.
Yeah, so I thought Katie and I would start by each giving a quick summary of the books we've written. So would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I only have one book that's on shelves. It's called A Psalm for Lost Girls, and it is a contemporary mystery about a girl who may be a saint and her little sister who sets out to prove otherwise, and it's set in fake New Bedford, Massachusetts. So it feels like Massachusetts, but I'll let you know which city it really is.
That's awesome. It's a really good book. So Alex did a good job of summarizing Saving Hamlet and a little bit about Nothing Happened. Nothing Happened is a modern, diverse retelling of Much Ado About Nothing. It changes some of the characters to be queer. It's got a lot of feelings. That is kind of how I summarize it. It's got a lot of feelings. It's Much Ado About Nothing. But Much Ado About Nothing is Shakespeare's kind of original rom-com. So it's got a lot of the same tropes that we see in, like, modern day rom-coms that kind of, like, did a throwback to them for this book. Yeah, so should we talk a little bit about it?
Yes, I have so many questions, and you just set up my first one, which is, this is a completely wild concept. Much Ado, summer camp. How in the world did this idea pop into your mind? Why summer camp? Why? How? How did you think of this?
It is a little wacky. So I actually thought of the idea, Nothing Happened's been in my brain for about 4 years. I was at Marlborough College finishing up Saving Hamlet for my thesis, which was my senior year thesis, one of the components of it. And I was like, oh man, I really like writing books. And I naively also thought, and now I know how to do it, so I'll just crank out another one, right? So I was like, okay, what can I write next? And I had just taken a class on comedies and tragedies, and I had really fallen in love with Much Ado About Nothing, particularly Beatrice, because she is fiercely protective of her cousin Hero, and I am one of 5 kids. I am fiercely protective of all of my siblings and people I love. There's a line that Beatrice says about somebody who has slandered her sister in the original play, and she says, oh, were I a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. And it usually gets that reaction when you see it. Everyone usually laughs, and I'm usually like, yeah, I get it. They would do that too. So I've always really gotten Beatrice, and so then I started seeing all those other characters as teenagers, and the setting really came from, for Saving Hamlet, I drew on this wealth of theater nerd knowledge that I had. I was a stage manager and a performer and an assistant director all through high school and college, and so I was like, okay, what other like big knowledge pool do I have to draw on in terms of making a community setting? Because Much Ado About Nothing is very much a community play. And I was also a summer camp dork for my whole life. I went to Girl Scout camp. Yes, actually, Jen Locke, who's in the book, is in the back. She was one of my co-counselors. So I went to Girl Scout camp for a really long time. And then I was a counselor for a long time, and then I was also an activity leader. And so, like, I thought, okay, I can clearly see all of this drama, because some of my best dramatic memories were from being a part of these teenagers groups, like, stuck together for a couple months. So that's kind of how that evolved.
And The camp details are all on point. So you've got this enormous cast of characters. I should have done a count. How many point of view characters is it? 8?
It's 6 point of view, but then there are 8 main characters, and then there are like maybe an additional 10 to 15 in the background.
And wildly diverse in so many. How in the world did you get into the skin of that many characters? Do you have any tricks for any of us who need tricks?
Well, actually, that was something that I struggled with at first writing the book. I really felt it should be multiple perspective because Much Ado is a community play, and to tell a story, I really wanted to tell a faithful retelling of Much Ado so that it could be used in schools, so that people could use this book if they wanted to teach Much Ado About Nothing in a high school. They could use it. So I wanted to be faithful enough that it would be useful for a teacher. And so that really put a lot of constraints on, like, okay, well, I can't rewrite the plot so one person can tell it, right? Because the original play, you get the point of view from, like, I don't know, all these different people. So yeah, there are people in scenes in this scene that don't, all the miscommunication relies on them not being in the same scenes together. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I have to do this. And I'd never done this before. Saving Hamlet is all one perspective. I'd never written a lot of the kind of characters that are in Much Ado About Nothing. And so I really had to figure that out. The first draft was really bad, and everyone kind of sounded the same, and I freaked out about it. And then my editor and I kind of sat down, and we realized that, she helped me realize that writing that many different characters in one narrative is like a real conscious effort. Like, you have to, like, make a list of which character uses which vocabulary words. Like, it's almost like that level of detail. You have to start saying, okay, well, Claudia's sentences are always short, and they don't have a lot of clauses in them. It's kind of one clause per sentence. And so you start getting the feel of how each person processes things and how each person, like their inner turmoil versus their external face. You have to get to know them really, really well. And so that kind of took about 3 drafts to get to the point where they all sound kind of unique. So for me, it was just making that process. Like Emma, my first main character for Saving Hamlet, was kind of an unconscious narrator. I was like, oh, I know what this person sounds like, and I know I don't really have to think about what someone else might sound like. So it was really bringing all of those decisions more into a deliberate place, which was difficult, but really fun. Yeah. And it was really cool to get to know 6 different people from that point of view. It's like Saving Hamlet, I love all of the characters, but like I have a real soft spot for Emma because I know her really well. Nothing Happened, it's really hard for me to pick a favorite character because I feel like I know them all pretty well. So that's kind of cool. Yeah.
I think you just gave me a writing exercise for tomorrow, too. My next book has 4 characters. It's like, now I know. Okay. Let me ask another question about character, though, before we move on. So you have this big cast, and each of them is a twist on the original in Shakespeare. And you might have to give us a little explainer for those of us who haven't watched or read Much Ado recently. But the twists in terms of layers, in terms of gender, in terms of sexuality, like there's so much that you've done. How did you think about the original characters? To what degree did you want to be faithful? Where did you decide to make those twists? And what was in your mind? What was important to you when you were making those choices?
Definitely. So kind of the original 4 main characters of Much Ado About Nothing are there 2 couples. There's Beatrice and Benedict, and then there's Claudio and Hero. In my version, it's Bee and Ben, Claudia and Hana. And so I really wanted to stay pretty faithful to Beatrice because she is everything to me. I love her so much. She's one of my favorite characters in all of Shakespeare, so I had to think, okay, I have to make her a little bit more teen, but, I really tried to stick with the spirit of Beatrice with her. With Ben, I had to kind of come up with, I love the original character of Benedict, but kind of like some of the battle of the sexes type stuff that happens in the original Much Ado felt a little antiquated for the one that I wanted to tell, so I kind of reframed it as toxic masculinity. So I did a lot of work to make Ben, my sibling calls him the best mom. Like, he's just like very sweet, and he's like very non-threatening. He's like that meme that's like, what's the opposite, like, what is non-toxic masculinity? And it's just Mr. Rogers. So that's kind of what I was going for with Ben. I love him dearly. My editor loves him too. And then with, I'll talk with the 2 that were really hard to write, I think, and that took the most effort were Don John, who is the villain of Much Ado, and then Claudio, who's the other not as acknowledged, but also a villain of Much Ado About Nothing. He is this kind of really insecure guy in the original play, and Don John suggests to him that his fiancée is cheating on him, and he sets it up, and instead of saying, like, oh my god, maybe I should trust my fiancé, Claudio's like, you're right, that sounds totally like her. In fact, I will slander her at our wedding. Instead of breaking her up, I'm going to humiliate her. He, like, makes all of these giant leaps because he's wildly insecure. And Don John in the original play, he actually has this line where he's like, I can't be anything but I am. Like, I am a villain. There's nothing else there, right? And so so those two was one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. So I was like, oh, I have to flesh those out. That'll be really interesting. So with John, I gave him kind of this really, really difficult thing to be dealing with, where his half-brother they're both the sons of a senator, but John was kind of like unacknowledged for a long time until there was like this public scandal and he was outed as this senator's love child. And so he like is forced to come to this camp every summer to make them look like they're a cohesive family that do things together, but his half-brother hates him. Everyone kind of ostracizes him. So I really wanted to give him like motivation and kind of like a deeper, darker place to be coming from instead of just, I am a villain. No offense, Shakespeare, that was great. It worked really well for Much Ado About Nothing. And then, and he also was another vehicle for me to talk about toxic masculinity, because one of the reasons that I chose Claudio and Hero to make them a gay couple was because, Don John doesn't have a great motivation for splitting them up in the original play, and I really wanted to talk about how young men sometimes feel entitled to queer women, whether or not they like really understand that the queer women like aren't into them, like gay women who are not attracted to men, right? And so he has a crush on Claudia, and his whole summer stinks, and he's got all this family stuff going on, and he feels like the one thing that I get to do is I get to date this girl. And she is just not interested in him. He's not reading at all. And when he finds out that she's dating a woman, he tries to undermine their relationship because he feels like, well, I get to have this person because it's wrong that she's with a woman.
Oh my gosh, the layers, guys. I'm getting. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Really important. So
yeah.
Those are some of the choices I made that were really important. Claudia, I wanted to make her really sympathetic, and because I hate Claudio in the original Much Ado About, you might be able to tell, I hate him, he's terrible. So I was like, okay, how do I make him cool and great, and how do I write from his perspective, because it's necessary. So I kind of made her this character that has so much insecurity, because what's going on at school, like, there's kind of hinted at, and there's a little bit of, like, explicit stuff, but you get the feel that she's kind of got a rough time at school because she's queer. She recently chopped off all her hair, which is kind of a bingo card to cross off in my books now. Someone always chops off their hair. So she's recently chopped off her hair. She's recently started to embrace her queer identity more, and it went really badly during the school year. And so she's kind of coming off of that, in love with this girl, trying to have her first queer relationship for the first time, but also wildly insecure about what all of that means. And so I kind of tried to thread throughout her chapters this kind of emotional reaction to everything before she has her big blow up at Hannah. So it would kind of lead up to her having this thing where she dumps her in the middle of a party without really realizing what I wanted that choice to make some sense for her. And
she's such a good character.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Is that okay? You can be working on yours in your mind because we'll have some time for that. But I've got them.
Okay.
So this story is wild. It's a romp. There's so much going on. All of these misunderstandings, multiple characters, hilarity ensues. How in the world did you put that all together? I mean, I'm enjoying it as I'm reading it, but I'm also thinking, how? Like, did you have maps on your walls? Was it a post? Like, how did you keep track of all of these different threads that are going together and weave them together into a narrative that feels seamless to the reader? How did you pull that off?
Oh, I'm so glad, because I was very worried it did not feel seamless. So when everyone tells me it feels good, I'm like, oh god, thank goodness. It felt a little disjointed while I was writing it, so who knows? You can tell me when you read it. But yeah, I worked really hard at trying to figure out who should be telling what portion of the story. I use Scrivener. I don't know if anyone you know that Word document app, but it's really good because it allows me to move chapters around really easily. So it was a lot of that, but it was a lot of, I think something that I am naturally pretty good at is keeping the original stuff that I want for a story in mind and like following that kind of gut instinct on it. So it wasn't the part of the plot came a little easier than the voices did for this book. So it was kind of like, okay, I know these characters, I know who needs to tell what. And then it was kind of like at the sentence level stuff of weaving everything together, of saying, okay, if this person is found out to be cheating in this thing, I gotta drop that bit in this chapter. Like lots and lots of revision, essentially, is the answer.
Well, let me ask one more then. So there's a lot of heartfelt stuff going on. We didn't talk about the mental health issues. You could slip that in if you want.
Yeah.
But there's so much going on in the book that's genuine and real, but it's also just funny and sexy and silly, and that had to have been fun to write. What was your favorite part? Do you have a scene or a moment or a part of the book that you felt lit up? Because it felt like so many scenes were doing that for me, and I wonder which is your favorite.
Oh, I'm so glad. There are so many this was a really fun book to write because I love Much Ado About Nothing so much that every time I got to write one of the Much Ado About Nothing scenes that I really loved, I was like, yay! So, I guess 3 that I really liked there are 2 where the other characters are tricking one of the main characters into thinking the other one has said that they loved them, because there's Beatrice and Benedict, they can't admit that they love each other, and so their friends are like, let's trick them into admitting it, right? So they're actually, my teen drama group are going to perform one of these scenes. So those were 2 really fun scenes to write, but then one of the scenes that I think was the dreamiest to write is Claudia and Hannah's first kiss chapter. It's only a few pages, and usually what happens is the book is you'll have someone's perspective for a whole chapter, but just this one time in the book, we go back and forth paragraph by paragraph, so you find out what Claudia and Hannah are both thinking while they're kissing and having this really big romantic moment, and like that was just a dream to write. I just had so much fun figuring out what they'd be thinking about each other, and like all of, this is like, for both of them, it's their first queer kiss. Like it was just, it was lovely. I loved writing it.
It was great to read too. That was a great choice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's open it up.
Sure.
Let's give the folks, what do you want to know? What do you want to know about the process? What do you want to know about the book itself? What do you want to know about Molly?
How many drafts did you initially write?
Oh, great question, Annabelle. I wrote, so this is basically how it goes for my writing process so far. I've only written 2 books, so I don't know if it will change. But I write one absolutely horrible draft. So with Saving Hamlet, I wrote that horrible draft, and then I got to edit it a bunch, like 3 or 4 drafts before I finally gave it to an agent and a publisher. Nothing Happened was my first book that I wrote already contracted with a publisher. So I had a short time to write it. I turned it in, and it was like so bad, and my editor and I were like, okay, we have to change everything, because that was a whole new experience, and good. She was lovely about it. But then I basically wrote a giant longer outline of like everything that needed to change, which was pretty much everything. And then I rewrote that draft, and that draft kind of became the final one. But so this one only had about 2, but it had a lot of revisions of the second longer one for the most part.
Did you ever get writer's block, and if so, how'd you get past it?
Great question. So writer's block is something that I used to be like, oh, I don't get that. I just set a kitchen timer and drink a cup of tea and I'm fine. I was just like very, very ignorant about writer's block. I was like, I can do it. I can grind away at it and it'll be okay. Writing is very much my escape and like the thing that I go to when but then I have now experienced some very serious cases of like months-long writer's block. With Nothing Happened, that was really during the first draft. I was terrified of writing it, so I had I think I had 4 months to write the first draft, and I really wrote it in about a month because it got closer. It was basically the deadline made me write it because I was like, I can't fail and destroy my career, I guess, right? So that was kind of what did that. And then the second draft, so what's really funny about this book is actually I went through a terrible breakup between the first and second draft, and I experienced a lot of writer's block because I was like, I don't believe in love anymore, and I'm writing a rom-com. What do I do?
That's a real problem.
Yeah.
That's a real problem.
But that was where Shakespeare was super useful because his words really get right at my heart. And so when I was like right in the middle of all of that, I was like, you know what? I bet if I read Much Ado About Nothing and if I watch Much Ado About Nothing to procrastinate more, I will probably figure out where all of that went. And so for me, writer's block, usually if I can go back to Shakespeare, if I open up Shakespeare, if I read another monologue, I can kind of get myself going again.
So just you're talking about going back to Shakespeare makes me wonder, are there also other books or writers who you feel like you turn to for different elements of thinking about your own writing? And like are, people whose voices, sort of help you open up voices you want to write about or channel or whatever it might be, plot, whatever it is. Or is it kind of really a back and forth between Shakespeare and your book?
Wow, that would be a lot. No, there are definitely a lot of authors that I love that help jumpstart my writing all the time. For this book, when I was going through, I think in one of the revisions, I was really worried about the voice issue. I was like, I don't know how to make all these voices different, and I really write really well in first person. And I tried to write this in third person at first because that felt better for 6 perspectives, but it wasn't working for me. So I actually read Rainbow Rowell's book, Carry On, which I don't know if any of you are Rainbow Rowell fans, but she's a wonderful YA author. She wrote Eleanor and Park and Fangirl, and then this fantasy book called Carry On that has, I think, 8 to 10 first person multiple perspective. And it's a long book. It's a very gay book. So it really jump-started a lot for me rereading that book. So definitely that had an influence on me in terms of voices. Okay, I can do first person for multiple people. It takes work and drafts, but I can do it. So that was definitely one book that was super influential for me.
In Saving Hamlet, I noticed how Lulu really found herself through Ophelia.
Yes.
Saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, she had that connection to what Ophelia was going through and her own life, what she was going through.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, in I guess Nothing Happened, is there that same kind of correlation with the characters finding themselves through one of Shakespeare's own characters from his plays?
So, wow, thank you for being so detailed. I love that you love that. No, that's amazing. So they're not actually performing Shakespeare in this particular book, but in terms of I definitely used the end goal for Much Ado's characters to influence the end goal for Nothing Happens characters. I knew that Beatrice and Benedict, I think, for them to get together, Benedict not only needs to make her a priority, but he also, needs to see her, the bond that he has with her on the same level as his friends, because, it's kind of he's got this, bro thing going on, right? And so when there's that moment that she says, in the original play, she says, you have to kill Claudio. If you want to marry me, you would have to kill Claudio. That's it, right? And so in this version, she says to him, oh, you can never talk to Claudio again. I don't know, what are you talking about? We're never going to make up. What she did was too terrible. It's not going to work. And so he kind of has to realize that not only is Bee an important romantic person for him, but she's also someone he super values as a person and a friend, and her opinion and how she feels about these people is very valid and very much how he should be feeling about them too, maybe. Not as perhaps extreme, but not kill Claudia. But I think he has to realize that she is not only a romantic interest but also a really, really dear friend. So stuff like that, I guess. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does.
Okay, cool, great.
Speaking of Lulu, I remember from Saving Hamlet that you did an incredibly good job tackling bi erasure and biphobia.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the first 25 pages, which I read on the way here, I was wondering if that's going to come up in this book as well.
I don't think it's necessarily quite as there's an explicit conversation in Saving Hamlet where bi erasure is basically when we say oh, someone's either heterosexual or they're gay, and bi erasure is a transitional period all the time where in fact bisexuality is actually a totally legitimate, this is how I identify for forever, or right. And so there are 2 characters. Both the women in this book are bi. Hannah identifies as bi or maybe pansexual. She's not sure yet. And Claudia never really says exactly. She says, I am really attracted to dudes. So, like, that's kind of what's going on in this book. I think the bigger thing I was concerned with in this book was, like, John's perception that because he's like, oh, Claudia's having a fling with a girl. Like, it's very much the erasure of, like, that doesn't actually matter. You can go through that phase of making out with that girl and, like, I'll be here when you're done, was kind of, like, his attitude. And so he kind of realizes that that is absolutely the wrong attitude to have, and, like, everything that he's been thinking about that relationship is wrong and devaluing of her. So, yeah, so that's kind of what's going on in this book. Does that make sense? Great. I hope this isn't too many spoilers. I'm not even thinking about that. Whoops. It's still a good book.
There's plenty to enjoy. You'll be good. You'll be good. You'll be good. One or two more questions? Should we move on to the readings and performance?
So this is the first chapter of Nothing Happened. And in every chapter heading, there's the person who's talking. So this is Bee. I fought the urge to crumple the paper, shove it in my mouth, and eat it. Flip-flops for the shower, bucket for toiletries, notebooks, pens, etc. will be available at the store. Why did my college's packing suggestions look so much like a list for summer camp? Ugh. I wasn't supposed to have to deal with this for months. Packing, moving, Boston. What's that? My sister, Hannah, peeked over my shoulder. Nothing. I stuffed the list back in the envelope. If it's not about camp, you can look at it later, Mom said. We were all in the living room on our faded yellow floral sofa, huddled over the coffee table stacked high with mail. Our annual Leonardo Family Spring Camp Paperwork Fest. Every year, my parents picked a weekend in April, shortly after the application deadline, for us to organize our camp's employment for the coming summer. Counselor and Activity Leader applications, CITs. I felt Hannah's eyes watching me and my envelope with concern. I knew my family was really going to miss me when I left, especially after this year with everything Hannah had gone through. They didn't need to know how much my stomach sank every time I thought about college. Hannah opened her mouth to say something, but I quickly cut her off. Good idea, I'll look at it later. I resealed the envelope and hurled the entire packet behind me. It landed with a smack somewhere in the dining room. Hannah smiled. Sadness avoided for now. Bee? Mom's severe brow furrowed in my direction. What? I said you told me to. You could have broken something. My dad carried in another gigantic armful of envelopes and dropped them in a pile on the floor. That's it. Next year, Camp Dogberry is going digital. Mom shot him a look. He gestured emphatically at the mountain of mail. Nick, come on, look at this. We're the opposite of eco-friendly. We're eco-mean. Mom sighed. She abhorred technology. I know you're right, as much as I hate to admit it, but no, she pointed a finger at my sister, that does not mean you can use your phone at camp, Hannah. Hannah turned red. We'd both gotten smartphones a few years ago, and ever since she'd been glued to hers. The no cell phones rule is important, I said. Don't forget the legend of the idiot CIT and the bear. I don't think I remember that one, Dad grinned. Bee, would you? Maine is known for blueberries and bears, I began in my narrator voice, standing up and taking my place in the living room archway. No sense in not being completely dramatic about this. Camp Dogberry in Messina, Maine was practically bursting with blueberries. As for bears, rumors floated around camp, largely because of one dangerous incident, the idiot CIT and the bear. Dun dun dun, Dad added in. One summer, long ago, a young dewy-eyed counselor in training was going for his early morning run with headphones in. I mimed a jog, bobbing my head back and forth. The headphones were plugged into his cell phone, on which he played loud music. This was his fatal mistake. Not quite fatal, Mom said, undermining my narrative. He set off around the coastline, blasting music into his ears, instead of enjoying the harmonious sounds of nature. So loud were his tunes that he didn't hear rustling in the bushes. Thus it came as quite a shock when a real live bear cub tumbled onto the path in front of him. "Ah," he thought, "a baby bear. How cute. I'm clearly not in any danger." Have we confirmed with the original source that this was his exact thought process? Dad asked. The CIT stood transfixed by the adorableness of the bear cub. With the music blasting into his ears, he was unaware of the approaching danger. Suddenly, he felt hot breath on the back of his neck. He froze. I froze. He turned. I turned. And directly behind him was an enormous black bear. A mama bear's job is to protect her kids, and she was afraid this clueless human was somehow going to hurt her baby. She didn't know the CIT was harmless. What would the CIT do now? What would you do? Because I guarantee it's not this. The CIT grabbed 2 pine branches and waved them back and forth as he backed away screaming, "Old MacDonald had a farm! E-I-E-I-O!" At this noise, Mama Bear stopped in her tracks, dumbfounded and, quite frankly, artistically offended. She realized that this creature was not dangerous, but totally ridiculous. She let the CIT turn around and run back to camp, where he did about 500 jumping jacks to release his adrenaline and then passed out on Monarch Field. And that, kids, I finished, is why we don't use cell phones at camp. My family dutifully gave me a round of applause, to which I bowed deeply. Excellent performance as always, Bee, Dad said, but I don't remember this cautionary tale making fun of the CIT quite so mercilessly. For instance, I don't think idiot is in the title. Okay, so I made some changes. I rolled my eyes and stepped over the table to drop down next to him. Stories evolve. I ignored the itchy guilt that crept up the back of my arms. This story was funnier when the idiot CIT and I were friends. Dad's right. Mom moved a handful of forms down the line. We don't use the word idiot at camp, you know that. Obviously, I won't tell it like that at camp, I assured them. You can tell it however you want when you run the place, Dad smiled. You can fill it with swears. I am running the place. You're the assistant improv leader, Mom corrected. New title this year, it sounded so official, I loved it. Plus, it meant I got to spend most of the day with our longtime improv leader and one of my best camp friends, Raphael. Pretty sure that means I'm a boss. Okay, boss, have a look at this application and let me know what you think. Mom passed me an envelope. I bent back the metal fastener and slid out the packet of papers. The heading Camp Dogberry counselor application in our official green camp font with little pine and dogwood trees on either side greeted me. When my eyes landed on the applicant name, I had to fight another urge to crumple up the papers and shove them in my mouth. The staple would pose a problem, but I could spit it out like a cherry pit. What the hell? I finally managed. I looked right up into Mom's eyes. Same eyes as Hana. Big, light brown in the middle, dark brown on the edges, like tree rings. Mom's usually reflected that firm parental love, but now they were straight up laughing at me. Seems promising, right? She tried to keep him smirking, but not that hard. Ben Rosenthal. He's applying for sports leader. Ben? Hana gasped. Do you think he's right for the job? Mom asked. Was this a joke? Sure, unless we care about the sports program, I replied, still dazed. Wait, seriously, it's really him? Hana hopped up and looked over my shoulder. I wanted to block her view, but my arms and hands didn't move when I told them to. Ben? Ben's coming back, she squealed in my ear. I guess. I handed her the application. Huzzah! Dad clapped his big bare hands. But I thought last year was his last year, Hana said, examining the application critically. I'd done the same thing, but it was definitely his handwriting. It looked like a chicken on a seesaw had filled it out. He certainly announced that many times, I growled. What a dingus. I should have seen this coming. Mom had moved on and was waving the next envelope. Well, he's not the only one going back on his vow. Here's Donald King. Both of them, I demanded. Unreal. They kept calling dibs on stuff last summer because it was their last summer. They got more breaks and chocolate and beer. I stopped quickly. Neither parent reacted. Thank goodness. Hana hopped over to Mom and grabbed the packet. This is awesome! Truthfully, yes, I was excited that Donald was returning to camp. He always brought a special something to Camp Dogberry that no one else did. He was really cool, too cool, so he made everything at camp seem cool for the campers and for the counselors, too. You're right, it's awesome, I said, but what is Ben doing back here? Isn't he a doctor or something? He's only been in college for a year, Dad laughed. Well, it's pathetic, I said. He made this huge deal about moving on, and now he's just, applied without saying anything? What else would he say? Mom asked. That was a loaded question, one I was not prepared to answer. I don't know, I sputtered. He didn't call either of you, did he? Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. Colleen might have mentioned something, Dad admitted. Colleen, Ben's mom. Mom tapped his application. And Ben might have called me a few weeks ago. Seriously, I yelled, to ask if applying for a sports leader would be appropriate. He's a nice kid, Dad nodded. His Mom smiled back. I'm going to kill you both! I threw up my hands. What were parents good for? I turned on Hana. Did you know about this? No, she said quickly. I hadn't heard from him since he texted me on my birthday. Ouch. I hadn't heard from Ben on my birthday. I looked down and scowled into my hands, imagined his face on a grape, squished the grape in my palm. But, Bee, Hannah's soft voice interrupted, isn't it better to have Ben back at camp? Camp wouldn't be the same without him. I looked up. She blinked at me. Hana acts all naive, but she's sneaky, that one. I shot her a death glare, extra death. Then I threw another application at her. What about you, Hana? Would camp be the same without Claudia? She saw the name on the envelope and immediately dropped it like a hot marshmallow. Of course, she said, voice screeching up an octave. It's great they're all coming back. My parents looked at us both dubiously. Then Hana attempted her own version of a death glare. Her round eyes twitched. I laughed. It was like getting a stink eye from a baby seal. My sister was the cutest person alive, and glares didn't even work on her face. Ben, Donald, Claudia, and here's Margot! Dad raised another application. That broke up some tension. We all cheered for Margot. I already knew she was coming back because we had one of those summer friendships that kept going the rest of the year. Excellent, Dad smiles. The Dogberry dream team. We're barely going to have to hire anyone new. I wouldn't be that heartbroken if, say, Bobby or John didn't come back, I muttered. That's not a very teamwork attitude, Mom chided. Dad held up John's application. Crap. Well, he came with Donald. Okay, I nodded, but more importantly, if Ben had miraculously got a life, would it be really that much of a loss? All right, Mom sighed, running a hand along her right temple. Bee, you have a couple of months before camp starts, so work on losing that attitude. I can't take another summer like last year. You and Ben are friends. Not till it snows in July, I retorted. Friends, friendly friends. He's the biggest pain in the butt friend I've ever had, I added, and a seriously lazy employee. I cringed even as I said it. She was right. I needed to shut up. The bigger deal I made about this, the worse the whole situation would be, and besides, it had almost been a year. When was I going to stop associating Ben with that one awkward night? I known him for 6 years before that. It made no sense, and it made me want to slap myself. You know Ben's got his strengths, Mom said. Not everyone's good at getting up early. He is the champion of Capture the Flag, Dad grinned at Mom. Man, I really can't wait for camp to start. I'm starting to dread it, I stood up. I need a break. I'll go into town and get us lunch. Pizza, please, Dad brightened. And can you stop at Rennie's and grab us a pack of highlighters? And clothespins, Mom added. We just hung up our laundry line. You got it! I hurried to the front door. I'll come with you, Hannah jumped up. Arg. I wanted to be alone, but I didn't want her to tell her no. She'd been a little clingy since my college application letters. Look at me, I mentally muttered, calling my sister clingy. This was Ben's fault. Before last summer, I never needed time alone to think. I did my best thinking with Hannah. Now I had secrets. Parents, I turned back to them as I pulled on my boots. Let's not be hasty. I am sure there are other qualified sports candidates. B, your promotion to assistant improv leader does not, I'm afraid, give you hiring and firing power. Mom waved me away, insulting. Sorry, kiddo, Dad nodded. Capture the Flag is my favorite part of camp, and Ben is Capture the Flag. I repeat, ugh. I let the screen door slam on our way out. I usually looked forward to this time of the year. I felt the climbing anticipation. Every form we filled out, every permit stamp and hire made was another step towards starting the day. Sun and sweat and laughter. But this Ben thing pulled me up short, threw me. Out the door, Hannah had a mission. Want to go look at the waves real quick? My sister loves all bodies of water, but particularly our waterfront, the pebbly edges of Messina Harbor. This coming summer would be her first as a full-fledged lifeguard and swim instructor, which meant she got to spend all day teaching campers to swim, and when she wasn't doing that, she'd be swimming just for herself. I'd known Hannah since she was 3, and I was 5 when my parents adopted me and brought me to the U.S. from Ethiopia. They'd originally planned on adopting a baby, but when they got to the adoption center, I jumped into their laps and demanded a story, and that was the end of that. Luckily, it was a love at first sight kind of deal for Hannah and me. Being sisters was clearly our destiny. I remember watching her in the pool, though, at our YMCA and feeling slightly 5-year-old suspicious. When I showed up, she could already dive and swim across the deep end. These suspicions had not waned. I'd never been able to confirm Hannah wasn't actually a mermaid. Sure, let's go. We set off down the trail. I tried to shake off Ben, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. Well, things around adjacent to him, sparklers and snowflakes, grass blades and eyelashes. Are you okay? Hannah poked my side. I smiled instantly. I'm fine. It is a little weird Ben and Donald are coming back, she ventured, when they swore so many times they wouldn't. Yeah, I nodded. Don't take the bait, Bee. We walked the trail in silence for a few moments, while I fought my dangerously impulsive mouth. Hannah checked her phone 5 times in a minute. She caught me looking at her and blushed. Maybe you're right, she admitted. Maybe I am looking forward to seeing Claudia. Oh, really? I teased, relieved of the change of subject. Really, she admitted, but I don't know if I'm over Christopher. I bit my tongue. Come on. At least Claudia was someone new for Hannah to obsess over, not that jerkwad Christopher who yanked her around all year, then dumped her, reducing my beautiful Hannah to a phantom who could barely get out of bed. Okay, I said. But what if this summer we just did our own thing? What? I could already hear the defensiveness in her voice. I just mean, I fought for the right words. What if we just swim and play improv games, do crafts, and hang out with Margot? I cut myself off with a sharp breath in. We had reached the part of the path where it divided in 3 separate trails. One led to the center of the camp and our giant log cabin mess hall beaver dam, and the sandy clearing right out front with the flagpole. The second led to our swimming waterfront, docks, buddy board, and all that swim camp stuff. And then there was the third option, a steep, craggly path hidden in the summer by ferns that were just starting to revive now. This little trail led up to Eagle's Nest, a clearing at the top of a hill hidden by trees with a perfect view of the stars, aka Nest, one of our counselor party spots. Last 4th of July, after our annual sparkler party, 2 of the counselors had stayed behind to clean up and had returned to their respective cabins just before the morning meeting, causing wild intrigue and rumors to fly throughout camp. That night. Bee? Hannah's soft voice ventured. What? Last summer with you and Ben? Oh my God, I groaned and stalked toward the water. I've told you 100 times. Nothing happened. That's the chapter.